Good morning, everyone in Year 10. Today we're going to annotate the poem Poppies by Jane Weir, and I'm going to make sure that you know in the beginning where the stanzas break. Because if you've noticed, some of the times when you print this out, the stanzas don't break in the right places. So I just want you to be able to show, I've been really careful with this one to make sure that there are 4 stanzas. So just check, and if you can't see that there are 4 stanzas, draw yourself a line underneath the line which ends blazer. This is the end of the 2nd stanza, felt. The 3rd stanza ends with gloves. And then the end. Okay, so just make sure that there are 4 stanzas. And we'll start talking then, because we're talking about stanzas, we'll talk about the form of the poem quite quickly. And we'll note that there are 4 stanzas, irregular lengths. So some are longer than others. That's what irregular means. There's no pattern. Okay? And we'll check our meter. It's free verse and it's unrhymed. Our meter and our rhyme scheme then. No rhyme scheme at all. And there's no meter that we can think of. It's free verse. Okay? So here's where we're comparing that. Right, so if we find a poem which is and we are moving into the slightly less organized poems now as we move through the syllabus of the 15 poems that we're learning. When we have one which has irregular breaks with a free style of writing which is completely unrhymed, no couplets, nothing. This combination... So it's a combination of disorder with disorder. I'm almost trying to have order because of the existence of the stanzas. So it's almost trying to have order, but no order. I better put that in just so that you can see where I'm coming from. So you're trying, but this combination shows that the narrator is thinking through the issues. Can you think of when that happened before? Now, with other poems, the narrator thinks through the issues. Think Kamikaze, where the woman is telling the story. Well, here in Poppies, it's a woman telling a story. So you're getting the same idea. And when you have a poem like that, because there is very little form organization, the emphasis then is not on the actual form itself, is on the structural placement of the words. Okay, so you're getting an idea that if there is a really regular form, then you're looking at the fact that the form is putting the emphasis on the words. And when you have a very irregular form, therefore, the structure has to put the emphasis on. One thing I haven't pointed out, which I should have done at this point, which is sort of our bullet point, is the syllable lengths. So, the syllable lengths are regular. Okay? There are about 10 syllables in each line. Okay, so it isn't free verse so that it's jumping all over. It's free verse, roughly organized in that way. So there's a combination of organized and disorganized. Right, so here we've got, let's do our form straight away, but we need to really attack the opening. Now this poem is called Poppies. So when I think about what I could say for my thesis statement and about the poem itself in a thesis statement, I need to use my orange highlighter. So my immediate idea from the word poppies, as you've noticed from our introductory video, is that there is this immediate reference to remembering death. Okay? That's what poppies are supposed to do. We remember those who died in wars. And we have Flanders Field poetry from the lovely poet that wrote about the poppies growing in between the graves and about how life goes on, essentially. So there's the remembrance side of things. And I think that the idea of using the word remembering and remembrance is going to be very important here. Okay? Now, when you just talk about poppy, singular, P-O-P-P-Y, I'm thinking one person, okay? But when we talk about poppies and it's plural, that plural idea of being poppies, okay? You're talking about the plural idea of sacrifice, and you're applying it to many people. Now, that's a really easy way of doing some of your annotation. When you get to the unseen poem, if you see a plural, you can immediately think, well, it's not just that one incident then, it's lots of other incidents. Let's apply it outward, okay? So it's a plural idea of a sacrifice applying to many people. It is also left deliberately vague. And I do believe that, because poetry is meant to be able to be applied across the board, and it should be your personal interpretation. So leaving this lovely heading deliberately vague, immediately talking about remembering. So when we think about remembering then, what are we thinking about? Well, in my personal opinion, then you think questioning the death, okay? And by death, you've got connotations of loss, okay, and sacrifice. Okay, so you've got the idea of you're questioning the death and the reasons for it. Reasons for it and responsibility. Oop, we're going to run out of space. Okay, so these are my ideas that I see from the title itself. And my main focus then is on the idea of remembering and loss and sacrifice that I can leave vague, and it applies to many people. All right, so a decent single poem analysis would say Poppies seems to be about the situation of loss and remembering loss through a war scenario, which I haven't written down because you see Poppies has war written all over it. We don't have poppies for people who die of cancer or just Alzheimer's. It's in war. We know that Jane Weir wrote this as a response to Carol Ann Duffy asking for submissions from her fellow poets to remember those who fell in war. And we know that Jane Weir wrote this from a female viewpoint. Now, let's have a look then and see what we can find that will help us to understand the two ways we can read this poem. I'd really like you to note that there are two different interpretations. We can view this poem just like in Storm on the Island. We can view it literally as talking about what it says, or more figuratively and metaphorically, and read a lot of other things into it. So let's have a look then. The poem's opening. 3 days before Armistice Sunday, and poppies had already been placed on individual war graves. Before you left, I pinned one onto your lapel, crimped petals, spasms of paper red, disrupting a blockade of yellow bias binding around your blazer. Notice how it ends with a full stop here. It is a complete idea. And you have your full stop here too. So you've got plenty of structural features here. Enjambment. Okay? You've got plenty of enjambment, and you've got your caesura. So if you're really interested in marking every single idea, the first thing you should think of is that the free verse, and you're not going to find this particularly surprising because it's in free verse. So the first ideas then. This is quite, as I think, a mournful opening. So if you want to talk about the tone of the poem, you could talk about, there's the semantic field, which usually informs the tone. So if you're struggling to find information, you want to think semantic field, tone. And the semantic field here of language, which is there for my blue marker, is very mournful, okay? And it's of death and loss, okay? So we'll talk about the vocabulary that makes this semantic field work then. We've got the 3 days. We've got the Armistice Sunday. We've got the poppies again, and we've got the individual war graves, okay? Then we've got the focus on it, he leaving, and therefore leaving being really, there's a lot of effect here with this comma because the left makes us pause and breathe. And it's the first place that we have to pause and breathe. And you notice how it's got quite a short space here. So we wouldn't normally need to pause and breathe there normally. So that is called an end stopped line. And that end stopped line makes you focus on the fact that he's leaving. I'm assuming it's a he, because she does talk about him later as being a he. Right, so what's the big deal then? Why is this important? Well, there is a lot of allusion here. I'm saying that really clearly so that you don't think I'm talking about illusion, but there is here very clear allusion to religion. So as a religious person, I can immediately see the reference to Sunday and the fact that we're talking about 3 days, okay? And that is a basic comparison to Christ and the sacrifice he made of his life, and therefore we're talking here about sacrifice. So the allusion here in the very first line combines with the semantic field of loss and being sad, really leads us to think that someone is sacrificing. Now, this poem has a really interesting address system. Who are they writing about? They are writing about their son. The narrator is then talking to the son. This is the first instance of the direct address. Remember in Bright Star by John Keats, for our unseen poem, how he's talking to the moon almost as if he has no one else to talk to because his fair love is sleeping. and he's just marveling at how everything seems to change, and he doesn't want that to change. This mother is talking to her son who is not there. So when we talk about the form, we can kind of refer it to a dramatic monologue. Okay? Remember in Shakespeare when we studied dramatic monologue where we're opening up our hearts, so we're getting innermost feelings. However, because there is an invisible audience of the departed son, that's why it's an almost dramatic monologue. Okay, it's almost that they are talking to their absent son, remembering the last time they saw each other. And she's really focusing in this short piece here the fact that before he left, she did this. And it seems to be the way that she talks is viewing this as a really sensory experience. Okay, so let's check out our sensory vocabulary. We've got ideas about pinning. Okay? We've got spasms, disrupting. Okay? And all of these sensory words are giving us the idea of how she is feeling. So she's putting her feelings into what she's doing. She's pinning. She's having a feeling of a spasm as her heart is hurting because he's going. It's disrupting her peace, okay? It's not just disrupting the blockade of yellow bias binding around around the boy's blazer. Now, when you go off to war, you don't have a blazer. You have a uniform. And it's not a blazer, it's a tunic. Therefore, using the word blazer seems wrong here. Why has she said blazer? And she's got all this fabric. So we've got the ideas about pinning, crimping, okay, bias binding, and blazer. But we've also got, side by side with that sort of fabric, I'll put that down, the fabric vocabulary, mixed with war. I'm going to call it war. It's not, okay? The war vocabulary. So we've got things like blockades, disrupting, spasms, okay? And the idea of wearing a uniform to carry out a job. What is making her focus on the fact that this yellow bias binding, yellow being quite a sensory idea, we can see it. Why do we need to see it? Because she is revisiting this experience. And in her mind, where she revisits it, she sees and she touches, okay? And it's mixed in with her feelings. So we've got this fabric vocabulary, which is the sensory, and it's mixed in with her feelings, and her feelings are all about her son going off to war and the dangers he's going to be in. So the feelings of spasming and feeling that she's being disrupted and her life is changing. Okay. What she's doing when she does this direct address then is she's telling the story to herself, because he's not here, to remember. Now, this is one interpretation of this poem. Her son is going off to war. She's really sad. She talks to him to tell herself, this is what happened before you left. A second interpretation has nothing to do with worrying about the illusion of Christ and his sacrifice, which I haven't written, I should have done. Sorry about that. Okay? And the semantic field of sacrifice and loss And then this mixed up vocabulary to do with sensory vocabulary and fabric and things she sees so that she can remember it physically for herself. No, we could just be mourning the loss of her son to growing up and going to school. Because of the use of the word blazer, we get an idea that he might just be going to school. Therefore, this is a red herring, which means this is irrelevant, that it's to do with poppies. Actually, it's nothing to do with poppies. Poppies is a way for her to remember that this is when it happened. Remember, 3 days before Armistice Sunday, poppies had already been placed on individual war graves. Before you left, etc., this is what I did. She might be mourning the fact that her little boy has gone off to school equally. And you can read both. But what you can't do is to change the thesis of the poem, which is of remembering. So either interpretation, either literally she's sending him off to school, and this is irrelevant, it's just what she's remembering, or more figuratively is that he's gone off to war, and that's why we've got the idea of sacrifice and poppies, okay, and the war vocabulary. Either one, she is remembering, and we're, instead of maybe remembering death, she is remembering loss, okay? And so we have the idea of sacrifice. Rather than this being a war poem about war then, despite the title of Poppies, we get the idea that poppies are being used to remind us that the reason why we are having Armistice Sunday and we are wearing poppies on our clothes is because we remember the sacrifices of others. And that's why it's very, very vague, because she wants everyone to be able to apply this. And as you know, she's a female and she's writing about a woman narrator, and women don't usually go off to war in the same way. And therefore she is very likely to be, and I'm going to put this at the top because this is another to go with my thesis statement idea. She is calling into question then the sacrifices made by those who sent sent, calling into question the sacrifices, which I can spell, made by those who sent children to war. Now you can imagine that you could apply this to the mothers who sent their children out of London for the bombing and who had to go and live in other parts of the country in order to keep them safe, as well as mothers who packed their boys off to the army or the navy. You can see that this plural idea of poppies, all about remembering sacrifice, is on purpose vague, deliberate, so that we can apply it to everyone. So in the second stanza, we get more sensory language because she is remembering what she did. So let's have a quick look at what she did then. Sellotape bandaged around my hand, I rounded up as many white cat hairs as I could, smoothed down your shirt's upturned collar, steeled the softening of my face. I wanted to graze my nose across the tip of your nose, play at being Eskimos like we did when you were little. I resisted the impulse to run my fingers through the gelled blackthorns of your hair. All my words flattened, rolled, turned into felt. Now when I read this, I see several semantic fields fighting for attention. I also see a woman who is saying, I did this, I did that. So we've got I did this, I did that, I did this, all my words. So this is a poem about how she feels. Okay? This is about how she feels making this sacrifice. And when you look for the I, you think this poem is about the person who is talking, not about what they're talking about. Okay? So what are they talking about? Let's check out our semantic fields fighting for attention. Obviously, when you've got hairs and you don't have one of those fancy rollers, then you do put sellotape around your fingers and you rub them over your clothes to try and get any of the hairs and the fluff off. Shows he's going away and it's important. But she doesn't say she's wrapped it round her hand. She says she's bandaged it. All right? She also then talks about stealing the softening of her face. She doesn't talk about rubbing noses, playing at being Eskimos, like we did when you were little. She talks about grazing her nose. Grazes are hurt. They cause you to bleed. Okay? Then we've got this really interesting sensory language to do with fabric. And I love this. This is my favorite part of the poem because you have the ability to show the contextual knowledge about the two different meanings of the word felt. Now this is structurally an important word because it's at the end and there's that end stop. And it has two meanings. Is it about how she feels? Or is it about the fabric? Okay? Now, there is a word that you can explore the meanings of, two meanings in fact. This alliteration here shows the mother, I stealed the softening. The alliteration slows us down. Now I know that it's S's and it shows that it's sinister, but sinister is also, it also shows emotion. Yes? So it's not an unemotional. Now sinister usually is a fear kind of emotion. We're talking about just emotion generally and sadness. Okay? So this steal, the softening of my face. I wanted to graze my nose. Okay, you're really getting that slowing down, showing emotion. What she's doing here is also slowing down and removing the emotion of her face. So putting this near the end of the line takes away that sort of start. She is basically not showing the son how she feels. And in fact, that links here then. How is she feeling? All of her words are flattened. So they are moved out of the way. They are pushed aside. They are pushed away. When you talk about something being flattened, you talk about having all of it's pushed into the side, it's squished down. Okay? And this is how she is feeling. She feels like felt. Now this fabric of felt is very soft. It's made out of wool, and it's made out of wool that has been basically washed at too hot a temperature, and it shrinks and becomes a mat instead of the lovely wool that we are used to having in our jumpers. And that's basically what felt is. And so she is turning into felt. So she is becoming something different. She's becoming soft. She's becoming focused on how she feels because her emotions are taking over. She can't control them. Thus the use of the two words felt or felt, okay? And we've got this metaphor then, because felt is the fabric. So this metaphor for her feelings of fabric and how her feelings are soft. And we can say that actually this metaphor shows that she's not coping with her feelings, that they are changing her and making her something different. So when we sacrifice, and we remember sacrifice, it changes us. Think war photographer. He went out hoping to change the world, didn't he? But actually making the sacrifice of having to watch all those things happening changed him. Look at the idea of the blackthorns, a really great religious allusion. Okay? The blackthorns of your hair, this is a metaphor because, of course, it's just hair. Okay? That's been gelled. All right? So saying something is something else, which it's not, is a metaphor. And therefore, because her emotions aren't felt, we're using that as a metaphor. Because his hair isn't really blackthorns, that's a metaphor. And so we have the allusion to Christ's sacrifice again with the crown of thorn. Or, okay, we have the idea that he is pushing her away with all the parts of his body, even his hair, okay? He is pushing her away. Or, that's what a metaphor does, you see, there's lots of ors. Or, he is wounding, because that's what a blackthorn does, trust me, I've cut enough hedges in my time. He is wounding her by his presence, okay? That's what a metaphor does. It gives us multiple meanings. If you explore those in your essay, you go for the top bands of 7, 8, 9. If you say this metaphor means it's an allusion to Christ's sacrifice, again, full stop, move on, you get nothing. If you spend an entire paragraph focused on gelled blackthorns of your hair, as you're and we say that we're explores the idea of sacrifice fully using the metaphor gelled blackthorns of your hair. You get your writer's method in as blackthorns and therefore the metaphor. And then you could say this could be a simple allusion to Christ's sacrifice, again linking with the opening of the poem. Or it could be more than that, and it could be the fact that she feels he is pushing her away. Because we could link it with the fact that the word felt at the end, and about how she is having to, is exploring everything in terms of how she feels. Okay? Additionally, you could say that he is wounding her by his presence. Maybe she feels that he is going to be leaving and she would rather just get it over with so that she can cry. Because right now, while he's here, she is having to, and we can say how the structure is stopping us being able to focus. We've got the stop, stop, stop. And all her words are flattening, rolling, turned into felt. These are action words, and she's being changed into something that's soft and is going delicate and is going to cry and cry because of the sacrifice that she's having to make. When we move across the page and see where we're going after felt, we get another one, because you see she doesn't end with felt. She ends with slowly melting. Now, as you know, felt is made, or as I've just told you, felt is made by washing wool at too high a temperature. So you've woven the wool very simply, and then you've washed it, and it's very, very helpful actually, because it shrinks the fibers and makes it a very dense, almost waterproof mat. Okay? And therefore, she is melting. And therefore, at the very beginning, structurally significant at the very beginning, okay, and I'm noticing this for you, at the beginning of the line, this is what is happening to her feelings, is that she cannot cope. So we hopefully see her reaction here, is that I cannot cope with having to make this sacrifice. My brain is not coping. And we get immediately this line, I was brave. She is acknowledging that bravery is applying to those who are leaving as well as those who are staying. She's reflecting. And this is very reflective comment, isn't it? Of, I can think back afterward and realize how brave I was. So we're getting an idea of the time. She's not speaking at the time he's leaving. She is reflecting afterward. After the emotions have left, she's able to say, yes, I didn't melt. Okay, I was brave. And she says, very sensory language. Again, she's playing it out. How did I cope? She's playing it through in her mind. Almost as if she's watching herself on TV. As I walked with you to the front door, threw it open, the world overflowing like a treasure chest. A split second and you were away, intoxicated. We're going to talk about that full stop in a minute. After you'd gone, I went into your bedroom, released a songbird from its cage. Later, a single dove flew from the pear tree, and this is where it has led me. Skirting the churchyard walls, my stomach busy making tucks, darts, pleats, hatless, without a winter coat or reinforcements of scarf, gloves. Okay, this is essentially working her way through her emotions, and that at the end is where she's left. Okay, so she starts out, I didn't melt all the way, I was brave. As I walked, and notice the with you is at the beginning of the line. Okay, I'm with you. I wish I was staying. I wish you were staying. Again, this could apply to a little boy going off to secondary school in year 7 or primary school at 5. But I walked with you. Okay, so her feelings are all with you, and structurally that's there at the beginning. Then we've got this semantic field continuing of violence and war ideas about throwing the door open. And we've got, now this is going to be something a lot of people talk about, but I want you to have something interesting to say, because there's no point saying this is a simile, because of course it's a simile, everybody can see that. And if you have nothing interesting to say, then I won't be interested to read it. The world is not, in fact, a treasure chest, so we know it's a simile because it starts with like. So let's go through it and find something interesting to say about it. She is describing it. So the first thing, this is the mother's description of what she imagines the son is feeling. And this is how it feels as a mother. I can totally confirm. This is how it feels where you have this tiny baby who you then have to free to have greater experiences. So for her, she knows that the world is like a treasure chest for him, doesn't she? That it's exciting and interesting and it has great things in store for him. So we have to talk about being free. The fact that we talk about it being treasure talks about it being worth making this sacrifice for. For her, she believes it's worth suffering for. And so she frees him to have these experiences, whatever they are. Okay? Now, we have to consider the opposite viewpoint, okay? Is the world like a treasure chest? Well, there are bad things, and actually treasure is dangerous. So there is a danger. I mean, we didn't say it was overflowing like, I don't know, like a waterfall or anything else that's beautiful. However, that also is dangerous, as I know. And therefore, with beautiful things like treasure, which is worth, there's always the opposite side, which is dangerous. Now, she talks about the world being overflowing with this worth and this danger. So you've got these two explanations. But he goes. Now, the word intoxicated being at the end shows that he goes and is unable to resist it, because intoxicated leads you to believe that he is, well, the first thing I think of is, if I think of intoxicated, because of my law background, I think of drunk or drugged, okay? So, when you are incapacitated from using reason, okay, which is why we think of, so he is not being reasonable or even rational, potentially. He is overexcited because he can't make these decisions if he's being rational. He's just overcome, like you are when you're drunk. He is overcome with excitement at being free. Now, quite a lot of the images for the rest of the poem are about freeing, okay? So the imagery in the poem are about being freed from, and we'll talk about it being a cage, and then that's almost a metaphor in itself. So we've got a songbird from a cage, okay? And what is this cage? Is this cage a place of danger? Well, if you believe that the songbird is a real thing here, and it's not just a metaphor for her releasing her emotions, then yeah, the cage is a place of safety. But she's releasing the songbird from its place of safety. And therefore you get the idea of being free. So he believes he's gone through, open the door with excitement. She's just being brave. So this whole stanza starts with this reflective comment. Okay? And I'm going to just mark that to help you. The whole stanza starts with the reflective comment. Now, for me, that is an idea for a thesis statement, because the poem is then split into two halves. Being brave in front of the sun. Now the sun is gone. How does she feel? She was brave in front of the sun. Well, she goes. We don't know if this is a real songbird. Could be real. I doubt it because of all the other bird metaphors here and imagery. So what are we saying then? When she went into the bedroom and released a songbird from his cage, does she cry? Is that what the songbird is a metaphor for? It's a release of emotion. We don't know. But then we carry on with the image of birds, and we talk about doves. Now, if any of you had to go to Sunday school, the idea of a dove is an allusion. So we are alluding to Noah's dove, okay? Where he had to send it out and it would look for land, and then if it came back, then there was no land and they shouldn't leave the ship or the ark. And then when it actually did come back with a branch in its mouth, he thought, oh, another couple of days, and then it didn't come back. Okay? So she could be questioning whether the sun ever comes back. Now, a very, very literal view of this poem is that this is the mum's view of the son, and now he's gone and he dies. And we've got plenty of vocabulary to show that. She's gone to the church, she's really stressed, she looks at the war memorial, okay? She's thinking about her son, but we have no proof of that, so you could go there, you don't have to. So very quickly, as we are already quite at almost our lesson time, we've also got the illusion, it also leads us to potentially come up with another idea of peace. So we either think the dove is a symbol of peace, or the dove is a symbol of the question whether the son will ever come back. Look at what her body is doing. Look at where this peace, okay, the dove has led me. So she's seeking, I'll go with the peace, for peace, and she's gone to follow the dove, and she's walked and walked, and she's ended up at church. Okay? And her body is stressed. This is what I do when I'm hurrying. Okay, I just highlight almost everything. All right? We've got this sort of stop, stop, stop. Okay? That stop, stop, stop of the caesura makes you really show how she feels. There's a focus on what her stomach is doing. And her stomach is folding, tucking, pleating, darting. These are all sewing, okay? The sewing imagery of what you do with fabric. And then it talks about how she hasn't even thought about needing to get dressed properly. Of course, it's November. It's right before Armistice Sunday. Therefore, she should have got dressed. Therefore, her emotions have overcome her reason. She's followed this dove. She's cried. The sun is gone, and her stomach is not coping well with it, and it's stressing her, and she's not happy. She hasn't found peace, and she's gone seeking peace, following the dove. Her emotions have overcome her reason. Let's see what happens here. On reaching the top of the hill, I traced the inscriptions on the war memorial, leaned against it like a wishbone. The dove pulled freely against the sky, an ornamental stitch. I listened, hoping to hear your playground voice catching on the wind. Now, she starts with after you left, okay? After you'd gone, then, is the starting point of this second half of the poem. This is how she's reacting with him gone. She's stressed, she's emotional, and her emotions have overcome her reason. She goes and stands near the war memorial, traces the inscription. So you get people about this poem saying she's looking for her son's name, but you've got this plural again. Why would she be looking through the inscriptions for her son's name? She would know where it was. She would have seen it as they carved it in. Therefore, she wouldn't be looking and tracing the inscriptions. So I don't think she's looking for her son's name. I think this is an image which for her is helping her just to be strong. She's got a lot of religious allusions in this poem, and the war memorial is usually near the church. And the fact that she is leaning against it like a wishbone, which is a simile, and there's no point pointing to the simile and saying that it's a simile unless you are going to analyze it. So if you are leaning against it in this way, now a wishbone is what you do when you pull at Christmas, when you get the wishbone, or at roast dinner. It's the back part that holds the breast up of the chicken or the bird, and you put your pinkies around it and pull, and you make a wish if you win. So she is leaning against it, making a wish, maybe to see him again, I imagine, okay? But she needs this crutch. You see, it's shaped like a crutch. Therefore, remembering is all she has. And she has got nothing left. Her physical son is gone now. So the idea of the wishbone is this is her support. Okay? This is the support she has, her memory. Look at how she talks about it. This dove leaves and leaves something behind. The dove is in the sky, and in fact is saying that the dove is this, which is a metaphor because it's not. And an ornamental stitch catches your eye. It's to make a statement. Anybody who's bought anything from Accessorize or Monsoon knows that when you buy anything which has ornamental stitches on it or is embellished in some way, you wear it to make a statement. And therefore this dove is against the sky, making a statement, catching her eye. And as we've said, the dove is potentially an idea of peace. She's desperately then trying to be at peace. And she hopes to hear a direct address. Right at the end, she's still talking to him as if he's there. But his playground voice. Okay? Now his playground voice is when he was a child at school. And as if you ever listen to Jane Weir talk about her poem, she talks about leaving her house and walking up the hill, which is where the churchyard is and the war memorial, and next to the school. All right, so we've got the idea of blazer and school as a potential showing that it's a figurative poem. But if we view it as a literal poem, she just misses him. And she's got all these memories as young and vulnerable. Okay? She remembers him as being young and vulnerable, even though the world is like a treasure chest and mothers need to free their children, freeing from the cage to allow you to have your experiences. She's not quite ready for it yet. Her emotions have overcome her reason, knowing that that's the right thing to do. She needs support, okay, because he's gone, and remembering is all she has left. She sees what she sees as him leaving. Always. So she'll see everything as him. Everything she sees will remind her of him. Okay? And I'll write that down. Okay, so if we go back to our thesis statement just as we're finishing then, this isn't so much a war poem about the boy being lost at war then. It's about the loss that mothers have to put up with when we send our children to war. And I think we can agree that there's a lot to argue about whether she has sent him to war or just off on his own out into the world, either to school or to university or out. Okay, and she clearly misses him. And therefore, the idea of poppies is therefore explored as a metaphor. And therefore, this entire poem can be viewed as a metaphor for sacrifice and loss. Okay? The entire poem from a mother's perspective. So if you make this idea to compare poppies with something else. You've got the idea of the emigre, where there's a woman who is saying, should I lose who I am as a person, who my birth made me, that positivity I have felt since then. They're questioning whether they should sacrifice that part of themselves. Right, well done everyone today. You have a lot of ideas here for remembering then. And you can easily combine poppies with a poem like War Photographer, where the author is definitely talking about how they're trying to get people to remember death and loss, but people just are not. And this poet here, Jane Weir, is trying to show how not only those who work in war, that war itself, suffer this death and loss, or this sacrifice that they have to make of their family and their own happiness, and that everyone has to give up something at some point. Okay, so do make sure you do your annotations, whether you are in school or not. It's a really important poem for you to learn. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.